So, hey, my name is Daniel Prinn, and I'm a staff writer with TheMovieBuff.net, and this is the Movie Buff Show. Today, I'm joined by my colleague Arpit Nayak, who will be interviewing with me, and we are also joined by Slater Jewell-Kemker, the director, producer, and the star of the documentary Youth Unstoppable, a documentary that Slater has been creating since she was 15 years old back in 2007. She just happened to start documenting the youth climate movement in a documentary that's been nearly 14 years in the making. The film is streaming on a free streaming platform called Waterbear.com, which is the first interactive streaming platform dedicated to the future of our planet. So Slater, thank you so much for joining us.
It is my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Cool. Now, Arpit, did you want to start with your questions?
Sure, I love to start with my question. Generally, we begin to sort of start with this question only. So I'd love to know this one part that, what inspired you to become a filmmaker?
Well, I have been in love with film since I was little. My parents were involved in the industry, and their friends and the community that I was around were either all artists or filmmakers or journalists. And so it was just something that I've always been drawn to, even before I could really speak. I remember going into the library, these like hazy memories of going to the library with my mom and like getting subtitled films that I just was pretty much watching for the images. And it just has always stuck with me as something incredibly moving and important in my life. And as I started growing up and engaging with the world around me, I realized more and more the importance of stories. I mean, it's how we connect to each other. It's how we learn about the world around us. It's such an absolute gift to be able to create these visual love letters to humanity and the world. And I think in such a trying time in the world that seems to just be getting more and more complicated, it's a real way for us to connect to each other as people.
So I think I'd love to ask this question because while I was just watching this whole documentary, not only that focuses on the climate change and everything, in a way it talks about your journey as well. From, let's say, being a 15-year-old till the time like 2018. So what it was like for you, to revisiting back old you and the whole journey.
It's definitely bizarre. Even though I featured so I prominently, I guess, in the film, I didn't set out thinking that I would be in it. I really just wanted to film the stories of other young people and to try to take something so overwhelming and make it relatable and connectable and human. And as the film was going along, my producers and editors convinced me that it was actually necessary to put me in the film because I had been doing it for so long and I had filmed myself from a young age, and that it needed more of a through line that the audience then could connect to, in addition to the movement. But forgive me, what was I feel like I'm not answering your question.
No, I mean, what I was basically trying to ask you is that let's say if I'll see myself again, at my young age, or let's say my teenage, it can give me a sort of a weird feeling as well. It can give me a maze feeling as well, So while definitely you were making this whole film, you could visit your journey, I think not all are fortunate enough to see that, So while you were just crafting your story, how did it felt?
It was pretty strange, particularly to like make comments or work with footage of myself and like refer to myself as a character. It was very, very strange for many years, this sense of like particularly at that age of growing up and filming things and being in the footage and then editing it and working on it and feeling at sometimes that I was like in this strange kind of Groundhog Day reality of just being so immersed within footage from a specific time that it was sometimes bizarre to think of myself in the present day or to view myself as someone who is older than the person in the footage. So it was very strange. And even now in screenings, like I can't watch the first half of the film because it's just so bizarre to me and strange. And also just, like seeing, it's already bizarre showing, people, your friends, what have you, footage of yourself as a child, but then to show it to an audience full of strangers who are watching you grow up on camera is very, very strange. So I usually just duck out during that part and then I come back later.
Daniel, you like to jump in with your question?
Sure, yeah, just kind of jumping off of that, even it feels very vulnerable, like especially that scene when you're kind of your parents weren't able to get the press pass and you were alone. I was like, okay, I feel that anxiety.
Yeah.
So I thought that's interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a big moment. I was determined to film myself, even though I was terrified, and just went full Blair Witch, apparently.
Yeah, even the camera framing, I appreciate it. Now, just also staying on that thing, just because obviously this is a documentary about climate change, but it also is almost like a time capsule of the friendships you've made over those 15 years. So is there like, do you enjoy kind of looking at it from that perspective?
Very much so. Yeah, it's amazing. I feel really, I feel incredibly lucky to be able to have such important parts of my life and just huge moments in how I've developed as a person and as a filmmaker, and kind of witnessed moments within the movement. To be able to have that to look back on and reflect on is amazing, and it's wild, and it's also weird, but it's awesome. I mean, a lot of, we all change over the years, and it's really interesting to see just the kind of determination and wide-eyed wonder and the feelings that I was going through as a young person, as a 15-year-old, trying to figure out what the world was and who I was in it. I feel like in a lot of ways my worldview has changed, or has kind of gotten to a point of realizing that things aren't necessarily black or white, that there is a lot more uncertainty and gray areas to work within, particularly when it comes to people and saying who is bad or good, that there is not necessarily like one person that you can demonize or a group of people that you can demonize, that we're all in this together and we're all complicit. But just seeing my naive young self forever preserved is always a good reminder that that sometimes being able to connect with my younger self and realize that point of view as well is really useful and important, I think, for us to remember that,
Yeah, for sure. And now I come from a journalism background, and I love the part when you were younger where you were like 11 on the My Hero project. We see you interviewing Jack Black, Leonardo DiCaprio. So were there any really cool interviews for that My Hero project that weren't shown that you look fondly back on?
Those were pretty much the highlights. But my first interview as a child for My Hero was with Ron Kovic, who the film Born on the 4th of July and is based on his life as a Vietnam War veteran turned peace activist. And it was my first interview as a child of meeting this incredible man and experiencing how humble he was, and that he wouldn't actually let My Hero film them unless I was the one doing it. So he ended up taking me on a tour of his apartment and showing me his artwork. And I think that, along with Jean-Michel Cousteau, were just these incredible moments of realizing that everyone wants to connect as people, and they want to share their stories, and it can be really just such a powerful tool to really tune into that and learn how to listen.
Oh, very neat. Now, does that My Hero project still exist?
Yep, they're going strong.
Okay, cool. Now,
Yeah.
what is it all about? Just the kids talking to their heroes, I guess.
It started out, the founder, Jeannie Myers, started it in the early days of the internet, and she wanted something positive for her kids to be able to go to see stories and hear stories and connect with other people about the things that make people and humans great and inspiring and worthy of following in their footsteps, and to be inspired to really find the things in their life that are worth fighting for, I guess. And there's still definitely a need for that. So it's
Okay.
very cool. Yeah.
All right, nice. Now, one quote I loved from the film was from your friend Elena, where she says, "If two girls from halfway around the world could come together for a single cause, why can't the rest of the world?"
Mm.
I don't know if you wanted to reflect on that.
Yeah, no, that is something that has stuck with me as well. Alina has said it, other people who didn't either make it into the film or who I've met with on the journey, or I've said it in other ways, is this sense of realization that we are all truly interconnected, and we are, I think, more aware of that than ever before because of seeing the cumulative effects of climate change and seeing how it's not just one part of the world that's being affected. That, I think so many people, particularly in the States and Canada, were like, oh, well, it's happening at the other end of the world, it's not affecting me. And then you look at last year and this year and the past 5 to 10 years in seeing how records are being broken for heat waves and drought and fires and flooding in the States, and just seeing how that's actually in Canada, and seeing how that wake-up call, I think, is coming to people. And I think why that quote is so meaningful is because so much of this conversation of the climate crisis and why it is such an incredibly important challenge that we've yet to face as human beings is because I think we forget that we're all people. We forget that we're humans, and that we're not just, our political negotiators or leaders, that those are people that, are trying to represent us, but they aren't necessarily us. And I think it's easy to live within the bubble of your own life, and it's very hard to step out of that and to realize that your life is intrinsically connected to all of the life around it, whether it's wildlife or nature or other humans. And that's a huge thing, I think, within the climate crisis conversation that is starting to actually be talked about and explored is this interconnectedness of all living things, that this, is what makes it such an existential crisis, because we're being forced to reckon with that, and also to see, in order to adapt and survive, we need to really rethink our relationships to each other and the planet. Like it is a huge part of the conversation, and I think it's finally being given the spotlight it deserves.
Okay. With just going on to that, and then I'll let Arpit ask some questions. Just there's this one scene in the film where you and Elena don't want to leave because just one, I think you were in Nepal. Just one aspect of the film I really enjoyed was that it kind of gives a face to climate change, and for people maybe in North America who don't know the people overseas, and it kind of emotionalizes it in a way, which I thought was cool.
Nepal is one of the only places that I've traveled to in the world where I didn't want to come back, because it was such a I felt like I was recognized as a human being and accepted as a person, regardless of the fact that we didn't necessarily speak the same language or have the same background. And realizing that was such, to go from the UN climate change conferences, which are just overwhelmingly these dead spaces where you have leaders and negotiators pushing for their country's interests and literally dehumanizing every part of this conversation, that it becomes about numbers, and it becomes about GDPs, and it becomes about these things that we think are what make up our lives in society, but are actually just like these kind of imaginary lines and borders that we put up between ourselves. And yeah, it's really, it's a big moment. It's a big moment of realizing just that so many of the things that we're taught aren't as meaningful or relevant as we think they are.
Okay, neat. Now, Arpit, you wanna ask some?
Sure. So I'd like to talk to you about this one particular scene that in a way was very deep for me, though it was a very small scene. But when you were in Nepal, and you were meeting friends of one while you were on a boat, you just asked this one guy, I think same of your age, that what do you think of climate change? And that guy replies, that it is really good, and then you have to just say him about things, then you understand, oh, you're talking about the global warming and everything, so, and in a way, while I'm sure that while you have decided to keep that particular sequence, were you thinking that you wanted to reflect the other side of youth? Because throughout the documentary you showed this one youth that is very responsible towards the future, very responsible towards climate change and everything. And in this very small sequence, we see the other side of you, which is not even aware of what is climate change. So
Yeah.
was that the reason why you have kept this sequence? Also adding to that, next line that he says that, that the developed countries are the one who has created this whole thing, and
Yeah.
then you ask him the question that why do you think that, and he has no idea about it. So in a way, we were trying to showcasing that how the general people have no idea about how the politics works around the world, how, let's say, this big empires works and everything, and how the whole thing works. So I mean, I know it's a long question, but is that why you have kept this particular sequence? Or was that your projection by keeping this sequence?
One reason we ended up keeping that sequence, I think, was because in a way it showed the ability to connect that you had just were reflecting on with Alina, of if two, young 19-year-old girls from around the world can connect, why can't our leaders? And it was such a unexpected and lovely, just happy accident that it felt really powerful to keep that in the film. That but you're right, in some ways it does actually, it does show that for the majority of people, this isn't part of an everyday conversation. We're trying to get through life in a way that is meaningful, and we have happy and successful lives, and we feel fulfilled in our relationships and our choices. And I think part of the reason it hasn't been more on the agenda for so many people is education, is media coverage, is the fact that so many of the industries that have contributed to and are contributing to the climate crisis are some of the most powerful in the world, and it benefits them to keep people in the dark. Of course, there's also the level of colonialism that goes along with climate change, the complete injustice of the global north feeling like they can dictate what the terms are, and to tell other people like, oh, you can't actually develop in a certain way, is preposterous. And I think that's another part of the reason why we are in the place that we are, is that we either aren't listening to each other or taking the extra step to understand each other, or we're just in the dark because media isn't covering it in a way that is real. It's looking for sensationalism or what benefits their news cycle, I think.
Yeah, I think I can totally agree with that thing for sure.
Yeah.
So I like to ask you this question that, that let's say if you can go back in time, and so what will you tell 15-year-old you if you can go back in time?
Mhm. And
I mean,
what
what
am
would you have
doing?
said to 15-year-old you? Yeah, I mean, let's say if you can go back in
If I
I
were to
should
go
ask the question again.
no, it's all good. If I were to go back in time, I think one of the most important things I would say is that, and what I wasn't told and what I wish I had been told, is that there isn't just one dark night of the soul, that there isn't just one moment of reckoning and being exhausted and burned out and then everything's fine. That we are emotional beings and we're not robots, and that this is an incredibly difficult issue and crisis to live with day after day. I was so convinced that I couldn't take a break, that I couldn't take care of myself, that I couldn't make sure that I was okay, that it felt like if I felt sad or if I felt angry or felt these emotions that were hindering my work, that I had to just push through them because this crisis is so big and important, and I couldn't stop. And I really wish that someone had told me that I could, that I was not of use to anyone if I was burned out, or if I was, and so this made me cut off a lot of my, strangely enough, cut off some of my emotional vulnerability with other people because I didn't want to seem like I wasn't a real activist. And only now am I realizing that everyone else was going through the same thing and experiencing the same thing, but they didn't want to seem like they weren't dedicated to the movement. And I think there's a lot more open conversation about that now, about the mental health aspects, about eco-anxiety and climate grief. And I think there is a greater sense within the youth climate movement, within society on a whole, that that we're not just these machines that can run forever and not need to stop, that we do need to take care of ourselves. And I think that's important too, because you can see from the kind of policies and negotiating that has been taking place that it is in this weird kind of like abstract world that doesn't take into account things that make
And I think half of the world won't even know about it,
exactly.
right? I mean, like everyday people won't even care about it. Like
I know
when it's,
yeah, people don't talk
so
about it.
I think,
We're all
it's kind of.
Yeah, I know me myself, I don't know quite enough about it in general. So that's why I thought this documentary was cool. Just for me, I found it very accessible learning about it.
Yeah. No, and that was I think the greatest goal with the film, and why I wanted to make it is because I think sometimes people feel like, oh, well, I don't know how to be an activist. So like I just of getting overwhelmed and feeling like it's not accessible, or I don't know enough about this issue. Can I actually talk about it? And I think we need to break down those barriers, because this does affect everyone. And whether or not you're someone who goes and chains yourself to a reactor or something, it doesn't matter. We need everyone to be talking about this, because we're in this moment of deciding what kind of people we can be. In order to survive and adapt, we literally have to rethink how we live and our relationships to each other. And it's frightening, but it's also really exciting because, even with COVID, we saw like, oh, well, we don't necessarily have to work in person if it doesn't make sense, or people realizing that, our family and our community and our friends are actually really important parts of our lives. And I think we're just seeing across the board in many different ways of life that, things don't have to be the way that they've always been just because they've been a certain way, that things are a lot more flexible and malleable than we think about them.
I think I just, it's not a question, but I think while I was just watching this whole documentary, I think that two people I think are like an unsung hero of your film. I think that's your parents, because I think they have supported you, because I can't think of many parents, doing the same thing. Like, because I think the climate change itself is such an issue that it's not a mainstream issue. It should be a mainstream issue, but it's not, in a way, it's a mainstream issue.
Yeah.
And your parents were taking you to all these places, and they were motivating you, supporting you. I think it's kind of cool of them, and I think they are the unsung hero of the films.
Oh,
As for me, at least, for sure.
100%. This film would not exist if it wasn't, particularly for my mom, who is a producer, and I think a lot of times isn't given the credit that she deserves because she's my mom, and they're like, oh, well, is she actually a producer on the film? And she really has, in my darkest moments and in my highest moments, been there throughout the whole thing, and helped me to keep going. And yeah, I would not be where I am as a filmmaker or as the person who made this film without her. She really kept it alive.
Awesome. Daniel, you like to ask your question?
Yeah, just jumping off of that. As your parents themselves are filmmakers, I just love to ask, like, what were some things that you learned from them?
Because they were more on the independent side, I learned that the answer is always no until you ask. Whether that's for trying to find equipment or asking someone to work on your film or to collaborate with them, or to even make a movie in the first place. That bit of knowledge and realizing from a young age let me also bring that into other areas of my life, whether it's filmmaking or the climate change movement. That has been a huge thing of realizing that I can ask for help, and that the majority of people do want to say yes, whether it's an interview or whether it's lending equipment. I think we feel, I know that I certainly have felt before that, like, oh, well, they're too important to talk to. They won't want to talk to me. And I realized from a young age that I was my own biggest roadblock in a lot of ways. And it's really inspiring to me to see, whether it's young filmmakers or youth climate activists, that there is this sense of confidence in realizing that that is very much the case.
Okay. Yeah, there was that one scene that I found kind of enlightening when you're calling someone and they're like, oh yeah, we'll give you an interview. And you're like, wow, that was quick.
I know. Yeah. Yeah.
So that was awesome. Now, I'd also like to reference one scene in the film. I think it was 2011 Kiribati, where the film's talking about the rising sea levels, and there's kind of like a display of statues underwater, and it kind of like almost seems like Pompeii in a way. Can you just talk about that kind of like simulation of like them trying to get on the floaty with the water rising?
Right. So that art installation was particularly amazing and moving, because it was showing how the reality that so many island nations are facing of losing their home, of losing their culture, of literally seeing their country be swallowed up by the waves. And how many, when you then think about how 80% of human beings live in cities, and they're mainly by coastlines, it's quite sobering to think about it. And I think those kinds of art pieces and that kind of activism, whether it's putting statues of humans underwater, or it's the president of the Maldives that year holding an underwater press conference, or it's young people getting an enormous life raft and saving the negotiators from rising sea levels, that it's this kind of creativity that is, I think, so powerful within this narrative, and any kind of narrative, really. because let's face it, I mean, the majority of us don't connect to numbers and facts on a page. We connect to things that we can be emotional about, and that are stories and are entertaining. And these are the kinds of things that I think help us get through to a larger audience when it comes to climate change, when it comes to food sovereignty, when it comes to the rights of Indigenous people, when it comes to pretty much any kind of issue where you aren't necessarily directly connected to it. This creativity is what I think really helps and will change conversations.
And just talking about the emotional aspect of the film, I was very surprised like how actually like emotional I got at times, because I was just not expecting that, and I really appreciated it. And I just wanted to bring up one moment that was kind of like, I hope I don't spoil it, but just one of my favorite moments when you kind of reunite with John Michel Cousteau. And he says that he gave you hope when you were 12, and we kind of just see 12-year-old you, and you see the same passion in your eyes. I thought that was such a great moment, such a great like moment in editing too.
Yeah. No, it really does bookend the film. It feels like the emotional just kind of climax of the film for me as well. And it's really interesting because that was completely out of the blue, that interview. I saw his business card sticking out of the pocket of someone that I was talking to. And I was like, wait a second, is Jean-Michel Cousteau here? They're like, yeah, he's over in the press pavilion. And I went over and he remembered me. And it was just this wild moment of mystery, or the universe kind of just, I don't know, the film gods smiling on me in order to go and find this great bookend. But yeah, no, it's a powerful moment. And thank you. I really did want to go out and try to make a film that was emotional, and that was maybe not necessarily the film that you go to for all the facts, but what inspires you to want to go on that journey of gathering the information that you need and educating yourself. At the time when I started, pretty much all climate stories were dominated by older white men saying how doomed we are. And I wasn't seeing young people, I wasn't seeing diversity, and it really frustrated me. So that was part of why I wanted to make the film too.
Okay, awesome. Arpit, do you want to hop back in?
So I'm just going to read this one quote that, and I like to know your view on it. So, change is needed everywhere. You just need an eye to see the need. Do you believe in this quote?
Yes, definitely. It's very easy, again, to live within the bubble of your own life, and to see what's going on, even what can just be like right around the corner from where you live. Human beings are very good at adapting to situations and normalizing terrible things. And I think it is important for us to not be complacent and to keep allowing ourselves to be open enough to see those issues, or to see kind of guideposts that lead you to learning more about them. And it can be very difficult. I even find it hard sometimes. I'll get caught up in my life, or it's like, oh, it's winter's coming, I need to go and fix my windows, or like harvest the garden, or all these things. And I get so wrapped up in it that I actually forget not only that I need to eat, but that I, there is this greater world around me. And I think it is one of the hardest things, but I think it's one of the most important things, is to keep your eyes open, because humans are very good at glossing over things that they don't want to see necessarily.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly described the quote I just said.
Mhm.
So, I mean, you have been, learning about the climate change and been talking about it since a young age. So let's say a general people, who like to contribute towards, let's say, global warming or climate change. What are the basic steps they can take, which is very doable for them as well. At the same time, they can contribute something towards the global warming at least.
I think one of the most important things that you can do, regardless of who you are or where you are, is to vote in people who actually care about the future of our planet and surviving and adapting. That is enormous. Another thing is to, watch climate documentaries, watch movies that talk about this, to educate yourself about what's going on. And it's, so many people still don't even know what a UN climate change conference is, even though arguably it's one of the most important conversations that's been happening. And I think also just remembering to do what you can with what you have where you are, whether it's being aware of the things that you buy, of where they come from, of being aware of the food that you eat, of the clothes that you wear, like just opening your eyes a little bit and being a bit more conscious about how everything that we do has an impact in the greater world. If you don't have to drive, if you don't have to fly, if you can do something else, it is huge. I wouldn't say that it's as simple as After an Inconvenient Truth came out and those nifty DVD covers had the here are 10 things you can do to save the world. And it was like, well, I mean, these are great, but we shouldn't really just stop at replacing all our light bulbs to be LED or to not use plastic bags. We really do need to change government and to change the people that represent us and lead us, because they can impact corporations, they can impact the greater cogs of the world as a whole. And that's how big this issue is we need to do that. But we also need to remember that it's on a local level as well. One of the things that I'm excited about right now is I live in a very rural agricultural area, very conservative area, and I'm starting to have conversations with people, with the farming community in particular. The thrill of my life was getting a text the other day from one of the farmers who comes and brings their cattle into the fields of our farm over the summer, saying that she'd heard an interview of mine and she was really excited to see the movie and to talk about it with me. And sometimes it really is just being open enough to have conversations with people that you wouldn't necessarily think would want to have those conversations. That's what's really exciting to me. And anyone can do that. You just have to be willing to listen.
Yeah, and I think even we can say that, sometimes your contribution doesn't matter. If you just even put a garbage on a garbage bag or box, even that counts.
It definitely counts.
Daniel, you like to jump in with your question?
Sure. And this is just totally random, but we had been talking about that you live in a tiny house before recording. And I just have to ask, how do you have such good Wi-Fi? I feel like a Neanderthal asking it, but.
Well, the reason I have good Wi-Fi right now is that it is sunny and clear outside. If it is raining or misty or snowy, my internet sucks because it pings off of a nearby silo. So I am very dependent on the weather for good Wi-Fi. I am desperately waiting for Elon Musk's Starlink to be shipped out and for that to be happening. Elon, you may be becoming the world's greatest supervillain, but please just give us all good internet before that happens.
Awesome. I'm glad we could that's funny though. I'm glad we caught you on a good day.
Me too. You can see it. So it's very bright and sunny.
Yeah,
yesterday
nice.
Was not like that. It was not good. It was very choppy.
Oh, that's great. And I also love to ask some just filmmaking technique question. Maybe not technique, but more about the editing. Yeah. I'd love to ask, I love just the process of editing documentaries. So, and obviously you spent almost 15 years in the editing room. So how many hours do you think you combed through for this film?
So we had about 450 hours of footage in so many different formats. It was a nightmare. But we actually started editing in 2015. There have been different kind of versions of the film, and obviously this film could go on forever. But I've put my foot down, and I'm not making any more. I'm not making any more edits or changes to the film. So we started in 2015. We were lucky enough to receive a grant from this organization called Connect for Climate, and we're able to hire an editor who actually lives in Peterborough, who doesn't live that far from me, who edited Stories We Tell by Sarah Polley. And for 13 months, every day, 9 to 9. He would come over and we would go through footage, and it took about a year to get to a rough cut. And over the years, there have been, I think we're now at 4 different editors who have spent time on it and worked on it at different times. It's massive. I realized at a certain point that I couldn't do it by myself, that I would go insane. But I mean, it's fascinating. Documentary editing is fascinating because, you know, with a script, with a narrative fictional film, it's like, okay, well, I've got this order and this is the story. You know, we can't all be the limey, but with documentary, you have every conceivable possible way of telling a story with the footage that you have. I'm sure there are like 5 other documentaries that I could have made with the same footage, but this is the one that was made.
Sure.
It's wild. It's crazy. I always think of it as like you're putting together a puzzle where you're cutting the puzzle pieces yourself, and it just becomes this insane like perfectionism, but also like obsessing on things that don't even make it into the film, and then like thinking people know who you are, and then running into them 2 years later, and then they're like, who are you? And it's like, oh, I've been watching your footage for years. Oops, thought that there was a connection there, but not really. Yeah, it's a really interesting process. It's a really fascinating process.
Yeah, it's something I didn't really understand the scope of until I started like doing interviews about, and I talked to like documentary filmmakers, because it's just like, well, just find the story, you know. But like then it's just like, oh no, sir, we have like at least 10 hours to go, like usually way more. So it's an art almost, and it's very cool.
Oh, it is. It's fascinating. I mean, it really is such a completely different way of thinking. Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah. No, I'd also love to ask, just what went into the decision of you doing like the voiceover? Because I thought that was a very cool through line for the film.
Well, on the one hand, budget. That was great that we didn't have to pay someone to do the voiceover. But I think also because just inherently the nature of the film is trying to be more personal and intimate, and it made a lot of sense to me to do the narration, because not only in the footage was I kind of guiding people through the story, but it made sense that my voice would be the one doing that as well.
Okay. Was that a lot of time spent in the recording booth?
A lot more time spent in writing the voiceover.
Okay.
But yeah, a lot of time in the recording booth.
That's got to be like a cool thing to reflect on all that footage and be like, okay, this is something I can write out of it. That must have been a unique process, if you wanted to talk about that.
It is unique. It's also difficult because sorry, I think there's a sawzall going off in the background. Someone's doing something.
Oh, all good. I can't hear it. That just makes me think of Mom and the Nicolas Cage movie, Mom and Dad.
I know. The sawzall, the greatest tool is just, so many great tools are just forever known as murder weapons in horror films, but that's okay. It really does saw everything.
Do.
No, I've never actually been asked that question or to reflect on that part of it, but it's hard because on the one hand you want to be as simple and come across as well as possible, and at the same time it's a very complex issue, and there are a lot of points of view and players involved, and it's you want to make sure that you're telling the best story possible and also not completely messing up and inadvertently saying the wrong thing. It was very difficult, but very rewarding, I think, to get through.
Now, I just had some examples from the film where just because you're kind of the star of the movie in a way, but sorry, these are wordy questions, so I'm just gonna look at my sheet here.
Yeah.
I liked it that you like kind of just laid out the facts and let us make up our own minds, especially in the scene where the helicopter pilot in Alberta asks you if you're pro or anti oil sands, and you kind of just cut it there. So I find it fascinating that you're the star, but you never really insert yourself. So was that a line you had to toe quite carefully at times?
Very much so. It was a conversation that took the form of just it was something that we talked about a lot, my producers and I, and editors and everyone involved, was a sense of not wanting it to be me just saying what is right or wrong. That obviously I have feelings about certain things, but that ultimately we wanted it to be a safe place to explore these things without me saying something necessarily like, this is bad, this person is bad, because it's a lot more nuanced than that. And so yeah, that was something that we ended up figuring out together and making the decision about, and felt that it was important to do that because in a way I already am crossing over the line of being the filmmaker who is telling a story and being an observer, merely an observer, because I'm in the film. And so we didn't want it to become just me ranting about everything.
Okay. Okay. Now this might be a similar reflection, but just I enjoyed that the film made me want to do more, but I never felt like you were forcing anything on the audience. So, and I find some even feature films can be like preachy and like just forcing your message on someone. So was that something you were mindful of as well?
Oh, definitely. Yes. And particularly so many of the people who watch the film are kids, and I didn't want to tell them what they should be doing. And I didn't want to tell any audience member really what they should be doing, because I think that's been one of the greatest failings with the climate movement, with the narratives that are being put out in regards to the climate movement, is that there's only so much yelling that people will take before they just tune out. And like, yes, we all understand this is important and overwhelming and difficult, but like, you know, people are going to stop listening or wanting to engage if you're shouting at them everything that they're doing is wrong or a lie, or that they should be feeling a certain way. That's just how human beings are. And so it was important to me to not do that.
Okay.
Or
Awesome.
at least as much as I could.
Okay, fair. And yeah, you never do, so that's great. And also just my last wordy one. Is it Thunberg or Thurnberg?
Thunberg.
Neither. Okay. Greta. That's great. Greta Thunberg makes an appearance in the film, and I brought one thing to mind, as she's like such a prominent figure in the climate change right now. So she gets like a lot of social media attention in the press, and you started around the same age as Greta back in 2007. So when there wasn't as much social media. So do you think your road was easier or more difficult back then when it was very different without as much attention?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that for the youth movement on a whole, I mean, it was more difficult. Social media wasn't really as much of a force as it is now. Primarily, young people were connecting and campaigning and figuring out what to do and how to move forward through forums or in person or on these giant email listserv groups. It was difficult, and it was because of that. It was more difficult inherently just to engage with the media, because they weren't interested in a bunch of ragtag kids who were just showing up and doing these things. So in a way, you know, there were a lot of Gretas. There have been a lot of Gretas along the way, and they haven't always necessarily been in the media, whether it's because they don't have the same access or they're from the global south. There have been so many young people with the same drive and passion and creativity that have been incredibly inspiring, that didn't blow up in the same way. I think she also was at the right place at the right time, that she the world was ready to start listening, and the world was ready to start paying attention to young people. And so I think a lot of that has to do with how media is, and with how people take a long time to start listening to these kinds of topics that we don't really want to talk about because they're difficult. Not to say that Greta isn't incredible and inspiring. She is amazing. She's a powerhouse. But she's not the only one. She's not the only young person who has set the world on fire. A great example being Severin Suzuki in 1992. You know, I still have people sending that video out as if it was just like, did you see this girl? This is amazing. And it's like, well, that's actually from like 30 years ago, but good job on finding it now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that one of the clips early in the film?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So Slater, you are as a filmmaker making these films that, you know, talks about really important issues and everything, but at the same time, you as a filmmaker might only get celebrated equally as the mainstream filmmakers will do. So how do you keep yourself motivated towards the films that you like to make, and also what drives you to do what you're doing?
I think with this kind of film, with this documentary, sorry, I'm on my phone now because that's the only thing that's allowing me to like actually. Right. I think what keeps me going as a filmmaker with this documentary is realizing that it doesn't ultimately matter that, you know, it didn't premiere or screen at the top tier festivals, that the film was either too early or didn't have enough Greta in it to be within those kinds of film festivals. But what has been incredibly important and moving is that this film has spread like wildfire to so many, like over 100 film festivals around the world, because of either word of mouth or particularly powerful screenings that that people have resonated with and shared. That this is a film that people can connect to and want to see and want to share. That has been just so gratifying and humbling as a filmmaker to know that something that I put so much of my life into and so much of my blood, sweat, and tears into actually is connecting to people, that it's making an impact, is incredibly inspiring and is what keeps me going. In terms of the other films that I want to do, they're coming. I'm working on them. But at the moment, I just feel incredibly humbled and grateful to be in this position where this film is being seen and is being appreciated.
Yeah, I think that counts the best. I mean, count the most.
Yes.
Yeah. Daniel, you like to ask the final wrap-up one?
Yeah, sure. And just to add to that, now you actually have time to edit your other films and make the other films. So that's cool.
Yes. It's pretty great. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I'd love to ask, just you're on a streaming platform called Waterbear, which I had plugged at the very beginning in the intro.
Yeah.
What does it mean for you to be on a platform like that? Because that's a pretty cool thing, that it's free for everyone.
Yeah. It's really great. It feels totally in line with what we wanted to do with the film and who we wanted to see it. I feel so grateful that the film is available for free on such a cool platform. One, because they actually get it. They actually understand the film and its ability to change people, that it can be a really valuable tool within this conversation. It's really cool to have a home like Waterbear, for that to be the platform that we ended up on and not just be kind of lost in the algorithms of Netflix. I think, yeah, I mean, to be able to feel like, you know what, kids around the world can watch this movie for free is the best possible outcome for what could have happened with this film, because that really is who needs to see the film and who I want to see the film, and the kinds of conversations that come about after young people watch it are always the most exciting and interesting, and it's just so incredible as a filmmaker to witness. So I'm very excited that can keep going, that young people still have access to it and can don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops in order to see it.
Okay.
It's great.
Do you have any favorite reactions from those kids?
Yeah. One that I think about a lot is I of all places screened in Fort Worth, Texas. And I was there before the pandemic, screening the film to this school where the young people there were primarily kids of either coal or oil executives. And it was terrifying because of being where I was and them being who they were. And it was just so unexpected and amazing after the film that essentially everyone was just in tears and questioning things, and it became this almost therapy session of like them not knowing that young people could not only could they protest, but that they could be beaten and arrested by the police, that they didn't realize that their leaders had been making these decisions about their lives that were so important that they didn't even know about, that their parents were involved with types of energies that were actively hurting other people and communities, as well as the planet. It was so just, I will always be so incredibly grateful for that experience, because it was the beginning of me realizing that people just, they get stuck in their own silos and they only talk to people within a certain sphere and range, and myself included. I mean, it's so easy for me to just talk to other people who like think the same way and are either filmmakers or they're in the movement and they know what's going on. And it can be really intimidating and scary to talk to people outside of that. And to be in that situation with young people who were having this huge wake up moment, and that they were questioning things and feeling things that maybe they hadn't felt before, to help them and be in that experience with them. And to know that they would then go home and be talking to their parents was just like, this is the best possible thing that I could be doing with this film, and that I wanted to keep doing that. I mean, that was just incredible.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Now, I'd love it if you could plug where people, I mean, obviously people can find the film at waterbear.com, but do you have like a website you wanted to plug or anything for the film?
Yeah, definitely go and find and watch the movie on Waterbear and share it with all your friends. But you can go to youthounstoppable.com to follow the film and follow it on social media. I don't have a website yet personally, but you can follow me at Slater Films on Instagram. I'm currently in the process of working on a feature film, of developing a script and getting to be able to explore and play more in the fictional world. It's what I went to film school for, and was kind of my first love when it comes to movie making. So yeah, that is currently happening and will be taking place at some point.
Oh, okay, awesome. So Slater Jewell-Kemker for Youth Unstoppable. Thank you very much for chatting with us on the Movie Buff Show. It was great picking your brain about it.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really enjoyed this.